Good afternoon. My name is Kelsey Thompson, and I am the Associate Director at the Career Center at IUP. And I am back for one of our summer programs where this week we are talking all about interviewing tips. So I am going to give you a quick rundown of what to do, what not to do as you prepare for an interview. So hopefully this should be helpful for a lot of folks, regardless of your field or industry, because these tips work for just about everyone. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So when it comes to interviewing, the purpose of an interview is actually two-way, even though it might not feel like it's two-way, right? If you're the person that is there for an interview, you feel like a lot of the pressure and the eyes are on you. However, just like you want the job, employers are also trying to find someone who is a great fit for their organization, their company, will do the job well, will fit in with the other team members. And so they also have some stake in the game when they are interviewing candidates. We hear time and time again from employers in our office at the Career Center that they can really teach someone how to do the job. So you still need to know your stuff. You still need to have kind of the requisite knowledge of the industry that you're getting into. However, those soft skills are super important. So think of, having a positive attitude, a really strong work ethic, being able to problem solve, having strong communication skills. Those are the things that employers are looking for and that will help to set you apart from other candidates. And so really making sure that you're emphasizing that through your answers is key. So there are a variety of interview types that you might encounter throughout the course of your career. I think the most traditional type of interview that we think about is the one-on-one interview. So you are interviewing for a position and sitting across the table from you is an employer. We also have group interviews, which are kind of unique. So that's where you are among multiple candidates. Maybe you have a handful, like one or two representatives from that organization, and they're asking you all questions. Now, with all of these types of interviews, it's important to keep in mind that they all kind of have their own unique quirks and things to think about. So with a group interview, oftentimes they'll ask one question to the group and each person will have a turn to answer. And so if you're going first, then you kind of have the floor, right? No one's shared anything, you're not being repetitive. Whereas if you are going last, you want to make sure that you're listening and you're not repeating what everyone else has said before you. A panel interview is what you see pictured on the screen here. So that is where you are interviewing and you have multiple people from an organization asking you questions. And that can be quite intimidating if you have, 4 or 5 people that are asking you questions one after the other. It's really important to make sure that you are engaging each person when you're answering those questions and you're not just kind of focusing on one person. Oftentimes, I think we try to focus on who we think maybe is in charge or who will have final say in that hiring, but making sure that we're engaging with each person on the panel is something to keep in mind with those questions as you're answering them. Informational interviews are actually kind of in a completely different category of interviews, but that is where you would actually, as the candidate, the job seeker, would reach out to someone in your field or industry just to learn more about their day-to-day, what they do. This is a great way to do some career exploration as well as networking. So informational interviews are something we recommend that students participate in quite often. Virtual interviews are actually something we're seeing on the rise. And I think we've seen a lot more virtual interviews over the course of the last year as a result of the pandemic and a lot of folks working remotely. Virtual interviews, when we're saying virtual interviews in this capacity, we're talking about different interview software that companies use where candidates go in. There is a video that prompts a question and then candidates record themselves answering that question. They're actually not talking to another person. This is not a live interview. And so that's really difficult, right? Because you're not able to pick up on the interviewer's body language and are they smiling? Am I getting that positive affirmation with my responses? But we're seeing these become a lot more popular in today's interviewing world. Skype interviews, Zoom interviews, all of those kind of streaming platforms, we're seeing a lot of companies utilize this, definitely as a result of the pandemic. And I think this is something that will stick moving forward. And so with those type of interviews, ensuring you have a strong Wi-Fi connection, a background that isn't distracting, you're looking at the camera, your audio and visual display is working. Those are all things to think about. And then phone interviews, which we oftentimes talk about being the most difficult interview, probably, head to head with those virtual interviews. But phone interviews can be hard because you're not actually talking to another person. They're just hearing your voice. So with a phone interview, while it might be really tempting to just roll out of bed and be in your pajamas, we always say, dress professionally. You kind of trick yourself into thinking, okay, this is not a conversation with a friend or a family member. This is something very professional that I want to take seriously. As you're answering those questions, make sure you're smiling, even though they can't see you, and you're enunciating and you're showing enthusiasm, because that definitely translates through the phone. You'll want to choose a quiet location with no background noise. And so if you have roommates or pets, try and minimize those distractions. And then you can certainly have some notes out to try and jog your memory. Maybe there's an example you really want to talk about, but as you've been practicing, you have a hard time remembering to share it. So having those notes out can be really helpful, just making sure that you're using them as an aid, not a script. We are human. We might stumble over our words, or things might not come out exactly as we hope they do, but that's okay. You don't want to sound robotic and rehearsed. And then do not eat or chew gum. With phone interviews, if you sound really low energy or unfriendly, or like you're just not really engaged or enthusiastic about the opportunity, those employers might just move you into the no pile. So making sure you're thinking about all of that as you're engaging in these conversations. So with interviewing, like anything, there are definitely some steps to take to prepare to make sure that you have a really positive experience. And so we'll walk through each of these here with a couple tips surrounding each. But when it comes time to prepare for an interview, the first thing you want to do is do some research on that organization and prepare. You'll want to practice, make sure you've identified appropriate attire to wear, ensure that you arrive early. You exercise proper etiquette throughout the interview, and then you always follow up. So when you are offered an interview, you'll want to take some time to research and prepare. Hopefully you've done some of that research already with your resume and cover letter that you've tailored to that specific organization, but just do a review on the company's mission and vision. Look at their competition. If you know who you're interviewing with, maybe do a little research on who you're speaking with. And make sure you know about some industry trends and issues. So the field you're entering, make sure you're kind of up to date on what's happening. You can never fully prepare for an interview, right? So you can practice all kinds of questions and might not even be asked those, which, it is what it is. But try and think of some answers or some questions you might be asked, or at least some topics they might want to discuss with you, and then have some answers that you've practiced beforehand. And then always have some questions to ask at the end of the interview. That goes back to that first slide where we say, okay, interviews are definitely two-way, right? It's you and the employer have some skin in the game. So have at least 3 to 5 questions prepared to ask at the end of the interview. And then have professional clothing identified and ready to wear. Ideally, you tried it on, you feel comfortable in it before the day of the interview. And then for an interview, if you are in person, or even if you're doing it remote or virtual, you'll definitely want to have some references identified. So if they ask for that, or you can offer your references as kind of part of the interview process, make sure that your references are notified so they're not surprised to get a phone call on your behalf. So before the interview, it is completely appropriate to ask who you're interviewing with so you know who you're speaking with, and ask how long the interview is expected to be. So, if you are going into a 15-minute interview, you might prepare differently for that than you would, a 2-hour interview with multiple entities. So ask how long the interview is expected to be. Have that well-fitted suit or professional attire ready to wear, and then start preparing. So start prepping. And I'll tell students and alum that I work with to almost make a study guide of themselves that highlights their skills and achievements and responsibilities that they've had throughout all of the opportunities they might discuss. So start brainstorming, recent experiences that you've had, accomplishments that you believe will really best demonstrate your skill set. And then have several strong examples in mind to support those skills and strengths that you talk about. This is where the job description can become really handy, because that will show you exactly what they're looking for in a candidate. And so if you have similar experiences or skills, make sure you discuss that and then have an example that demonstrates you using that skill or doing that same responsibility, because past behavior always predicts future behavior. So if you can show how you've handled something or have accomplished something in the past, then that will indicate how you would approach it in this role. And then have some questions to ask at the end. I always advise anyone preparing for an interview to practice conversation. So make sure, if you're not someone who loves small talk, there will probably be some small talk either at the beginning or the end, or maybe in between parts of the interview. So having some topics you feel comfortable discussing is really helpful. And then have a few well-rehearsed sentences. We call this your elevator pitch. So oftentimes at the beginning of an interview, you might get asked, tell me a little bit about yourself, which is a really open-ended question and can be hard to answer if you don't know what to say. So having those well-rehearsed sentences ready to go beforehand allows you to really nail that interview answer, and then can kind of set the tone for the rest of the interview. And so your elevator speech, your elevator pitch, it answers who you are, what you've done, and what you hope to accomplish. Practice answering questions. So as I shared, you don't know what you're going to be asked, but think of some broad topics and things that, put yourself in the interviewer's shoes. What would you want to know if you were hiring for this position? You can have someone ask you those questions. So maybe a friend, a family member, a faculty member, we can assist with that at the CPDC, or even just, practice in the mirror. I know when I was preparing for interviews, I would answer questions as I was driving in my car, just because that was an easy way to kind of kill some time. And then practice asking questions. So again, having those 3 to 5 questions prepared at the end of the interview to ask the interviewers. You definitely want to dress the part for an interview. And now our advice is always to dress more professional. And typically the advice we give is to dress more on the conservative side, which definitely varies depending on the industry that you're looking to enter. So just kind of keep that in mind. But ideally, you'll want to have some type of nice suit in a conservative color, so navy, black, or gray. You'll have a matching dress shirt and tie underneath. If you choose to wear a skirt or pants, just make sure that it complements each other. If your blouse is too low, that can be distracting, right? So we're kind of leaning towards the side of more conservative. So just keep that in mind. And then skirt should be no more than 2 inches above the knee. Definitely you want to have some professional shoes to wear that you feel comfortable walking in. So shine shoes, dark socks if you're wearing socks with those shoes, or if you choose to wear heels, make sure that you feel comfortable walking in them. Flats might be a better option, and then neutral hosiery if you are wearing hosiery. In terms of hair and accessories, just make sure it's clean. If you are someone that plays with their hair when they get to kind of nervous, that can be a nervous habit for some folks. Make sure that you kind of have it pulled back, minimal jewelry. Really, we're just trying to get at here is that you don't want anything to distract from you and your answers. If you have some papers with you, or you maybe want to take notes periodically, have a nice briefcase or portfolio or padfolio for those papers. Your cell phone should be turned off from the time you kind of leave your car. You definitely don't want that ringing during the interview. And then subtle amounts of cologne and perfume is acceptable. So just don't, take a bath in whatever spray you put on that morning. The day of the interview, so you get up, it's interview day. What do I need to do? Make sure that you check your clothes, your grooming, you feel ready to go. You've identified a professional outfit that's steamed or ironed. You might want to have a lint brush, a hairbrush, shoe polish, an umbrella ready. You just never know what you might run into. Have a notepad and pen with you. You might not use it, but it's always nice to have. I always advise folks to have a few copies of their resume, their cover letter, and their references. This mostly applies to if you are doing something in person, but even if you are doing a Zoom interview or a Skype interview, having those copies up on your computer, so if you need to send them quickly, is good to do. And then remember that the interview lasts from the time that you get out of your car or the time you log onto the computer to the time that you get back in it or log off. So you want to turn your phone off and just be aware of your behavior. So definitely in person, we'll advise students and alum to make sure they're greeting any office personnel or anyone that's in the building, professionally and kindly. You are smiling, you're not looking distracted. they're kind of taking in, employers a lot of times are taking in all of those interactions. So as soon as you step out of the car or as soon as you kind of log onto that computer, it's ready, you're ready to go. If you are someone that is perpetually late, that can be me sometimes, which is not my best quality, but for an interview, definitely arrive early. About 10 to 15 minutes before the set interview time is ideal. Allow for traffic and other obstacles. So I am someone who always gets nervous about parking. So if that is you, make sure that you give yourself some time to figure that out and still arrive at the interview space 10 to 15 minutes prior. Give yourself some time to freshen up. So maybe make a restroom run, check your outfit, make sure that everything's good to go, and then greet any front office personnel pleasantly. And you can use that time before the interview to review maybe some key points you want to address, look over your notes, kind of just give yourself one last time to review everything you hope to discuss. Now, the introduction, again, this very much applies for in-person interviews, but a lot of it can translate to some of those other interview styles or modalities that you might encounter. But when you are introducing yourself, make sure you have a warm smile. This is your first impression, and first impressions are so crucial. So you want to really take this part of the interview seriously. So smiling is a great way to do that, showing that you're confident and excited to be there. When we get back to doing handshakes, I know handshakes have kind of been a thing of the past lately, but handshakes typically are the appropriate way to greet someone in the professional setting. And so don't hesitate, 2 to 3 pumps, making sure that you are making eye contact during that handshake, and then greeting whoever is coming out to address you or take you back with the appropriate first and last names. Maybe it's, Dr. Manko, Miss Thompson, Mr. Smith, making sure that you are addressing them appropriately. Really try to stay positive and enthusiastic and avoid speaking in slang or shortening words. So really, speak clearly. Now, during the opening stages of the interview, I really can't emphasize enough to try and stay calm and focused. If you can start the interview off calm and confident and focused, that will translate throughout the rest of the interview. If you start the interview kind of all worked up and real anxious, it can be hard to kind of get yourself back down to a place where you feel really comfortable. So as best as you can, take a deep breath, make sure you're sitting up straight, you have that open body language, and let the interview begin. The interviewers almost always have an agenda that they'll follow. So they'll kind of take the lead and begin asking you questions. So just kind of follow what they are doing. Make sure you're listening, right? As much as they are trying to hear your answers and your responses, making sure that you are engaged in the conversation is key. Sometimes, and I am guilty of this myself, I'm thinking, 5 steps ahead. Oh man, I hope they don't ask me this question, or do I know what I'm going to say if they bring this up? And then I don't actually hear what's happening in the present moment. So try not to get too distracted, listen to what they're saying, and then be prepared for different interview styles. So some people are really stern when they interview. They don't give you a lot of positive affirmation. They're not smiling. They're not nodding their head like, okay, yeah, that's a great answer. And that's completely okay. On the opposite side of that, you might have people that give you a lot of positive affirmation. So just be prepared. People have different styles and how they interact in these type of situations. So don't read too much into it. Now, during the interview, super important to display genuine confidence and enthusiasm for your field of work. Let them see your personality too. This is a professional conversation. So there are very much topics that are off limits and you want to be appropriate and professional, but you can smile, you can, talk a little bit about yourself and let them see who you are. If you've made it to the interview, you definitely meet some of the skill sets and requirements that they've set forth or put out for this position. So at this point, they're trying to determine the degree of fit. Will you fit into the department? Do you have the personality that will mesh well with our team members? So let them see who you are. All of your interview responses should be somewhere between 30 seconds to 2 minutes. That definitely can vary based off of what they're asking you, but that's a general range to shoot for. If you're interviewing with more than one person, so for maybe a panel interview, make sure you are making eye contact with every person. And then just being mindful of your body language, your posture, your mannerisms, your facial expressions. So those nonverbals, you want to make sure that whatever you're saying is also matching kind of your expressions and your body language as well. Keep an open mind. Be respectful of others. As best as you can, try to avoid and like. And like are a natural part of our dialect at this point. And so don't get too hung up on that. You kind of, forget what you're actually trying to say with your answer, but just if you find that you're saying it every other word, then helpful to practice those answers beforehand. And just as you're answering, making sure that you're not saying it too much. And then I said this earlier, and I'm going to say it again. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you with interviewing is that when you were talking about your skills and your knowledge and your experience, always back those up with examples. So don't just tell someone that you're a good communicator. Don't just tell someone that you have really strong, quantitative research skills. Have an example and show them. So those examples are key. And it's helpful to practice or have some of those thought of beforehand. So if you're asked, you can think, okay, I'm going to talk about what I did in my internship, or when I worked at that on-campus job, I had experience doing this. I'm definitely going to bring that up if I'm asked about that topic. A lot of interviewers today use what we call the behavioral-based interviewing method. And so they're asking you to draw upon specific experiences that you've had. And those questions can be hard to answer if you don't know, what you're going to share, or if you haven't thought of those examples in the past. And they can be hard to really stay on task when you're telling a story. And so for those type of questions, and you'll notice what these questions are because they'll start with, tell me about a time when, or can you share an example of? And so if you get a behavioral based question, using the STAR method is really helpful. And so STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So with that, it's a really great way to just answer the question fully and stay on track. So with situation, you're giving enough information so that the person that you are talking to understands the context of the example that you're sharing. Task is kind of what you were faced with. Action then is what you did. And a result is just bringing it full circle. So I like to think of it as a movie. If you're following a good movie, they'll kind of lay out the plot, and then you kind of have what the main point of the movie is, which would be your task. Then what happens and how does it end up? So that's how I like to think of the STAR method when I'm answering those questions. I'll put a couple common questions on the screen here for you to see. Again, every interview will look different, but a lot of times you'll maybe get asked something about strengths and weaknesses. You might be asked that tell me a little bit about yourself question where you would use your elevator speech. Another great question, or a behavioral based question, kind of going off of that STAR method. Tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult coworker, customer, classmate, and how you handled that situation. So those are just some examples of common questions you might be asked. And then at the end of the interview, as we've reiterated a few times already, you'll want to have questions to ask. So always have 3 to 5. And the last question should always be, when can I expect to hear from you? So you know their hiring timeline and when it would be appropriate to follow up. But you might ask, what do you like about working here to the folks that are interviewing you? You might ask how the position is evaluated, or ask for clarification or further explanation on the onboarding and training process. I always advise people to have a few questions prepared, but you might find that through the interview, other questions pop up, and you can certainly ask those as well. But try to stick within that 3 to 5 question range. As the interview closes, just as the interviewer kind of takes the lead at the beginning, you'll wait for them to initiate the end of the interview. Again, if you have the opportunity to do so, confirm your interest in the position and clarify their follow-up procedure. A handshake at this point, if you are in person, is typically how you would end that conversation. If you don't have business cards or contact information, make sure you have those or know how to obtain those, because after the interview has concluded, you'll definitely want to follow up. And so following up either via a handwritten thank you note or an email is completely acceptable. You might choose to connect with them on LinkedIn as well. Whatever you include in that note does not have to be too lengthy, but a couple things to think about are to thank them for their time with speaking with you that day. Bring up a specific point that you discussed. So maybe, the person you're writing the thank you note or the email to talked about the onboarding process, and you really appreciated that clarification. So maybe that's something that you discussed. So have that personal little anecdote in there, and then thank them for the opportunity and let them know you look forward to hearing from them soon. So these can typically range anywhere from 4 to 6 sentences, depending on what you're discussing. And these should be sent within about 24 hours. So pretty soon thereafter the interview, you'll want to get those follow-up thank you notes or thank you emails out. So at this point, I have covered everything I could think of for interviewing. I'm sure there are things that I've missed. And if you have further questions, please know that we at the Career Center are here to help. I have our contact information on the screen here. We are certainly here to assist as you kind of go through this process, you start job searching and maybe get those interview offers. So please know that that's why we are here. I look forward to hopefully interacting with many of you throughout the rest of the summer or this coming fall at the Career Center. So thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.